it's like to lose. Feel so desperately you're right, and to fail nonetheless. Frightening, turns the legs to jelly. I ask to what end? Dreaded, run from it, destiny arrives all the same. Or should I say, I am.
Those were up, and they did.
We're smart, and my...
He told me enough.
No, I.
Here's Chuck.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review. And this movie review is going to be for the 18th film in the series I am currently doing the review series on. This film is going to be for the third crossover, the third installment of its crossover series. It's the 18th film of the MCU, the 18th film of the Infinity Saga, and the one I've been long awaiting to review, because you can tell by this background I got the Infinity Gauntlet 2018 Infinity War version of Thanos, Infinity War poster, and I even have the movie on Blu-ray. And this film is going to be for none other than my favorite MCU film and favorite of the Infinity Saga, 2018's Avengers Infinity War, directed by Anthony and Joe Russo. What's the plot of this? Well, as the Avengers and their allies have continued to protect the world from threats too large for any one hero to handle, a new danger has emerged from the cosmic shadows: Thanos. A despot of intergalactic infamy, his goal is to collect all the Infinity Stones, artifacts of unimaginable power, and use them to inflict his twisted will on all of reality. Everything the Avengers have fought for has led up to this moment. The fate of Earth and existence has never been more uncertain. So how is this made? Well, in October 2014, Marvel announced a two-part sequel to Age of Ultron titled Infinity War Part 1, and which would be released on May 2018, and Part 2 would be released in May 2019. In April 2015, Marvel announced Anthony and Joe Russo would direct both parts of Infinity War, with back-to-back filming expected to begin in 2016. The next month, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely had signed on to write the screenplays for both parts of the film, which draws inspiration from Jim Starlin's 1991 The Infinity Gauntlet comic and Jonathan Hickman's 2013 Infinity comic. Anthony Russo added the film was inspired by 1990s heist films, with Thanos on a smashing grab to acquire all the Infinity Stones. Producer Kevin Feige even said the films were titled as two parts of a single film because of the shared elements between the films, but he felt that they would be two distinct films, not one story split across two films. And in May 2016, the Russos revealed they would retitle the two films to further remove its misconception. That July, Marvel revealed Part 1's title would be shortened to simply Avengers Infinity War. Then, principal photography began on January 23rd, 2017, under the working title Mary Lou at Pinewood Atlanta Studios in Failing Country, Georgia, with Trent Opach as director of photography. Infinity War, along with its still untitled sequel at the time, were shot using ARRI Alexa IMAX 2D cameras, and thus marking the first time a Hollywood feature film was shot entirely with IMAX cameras. In early February, Marvel confirmed the involvement of Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, Pratt as Star-Lord, and Tom Holland as Parker in this film. Initial filming took place in Scotland beginning in February 2017. The filming occurred in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and the Scottish Highlands, with studio work taking place at Ward Park Studios in Cumbernauld. In late June 2017, filming occurred in downtown Atlanta, as well as Atlanta Central Park in early July, before moving to Queens, New York in the middle of the month. Filming then concluded on July 14, 2017, and for the film's final scene, they worked with Thailand-based Studio Income Productions to acquire footage of Anata rice terraces on the Philippines. And then later in July 2017, Joe Russo stated there were a couple of unfinished scenes for Infinity War that would be shot in the next few months. Then in March 2018, Disney moved the release of Infinity War in the United States from May 4th to April 27th, 2018, to have it be released the same weekend as some of its international markets. Visual effects for the film were even created by Industrial Light and Magic, Framestore, Method Studios, Weta Digital, DNEG, Cinesite, Digital Domain, Lola VFX, and Perception. With an estimated budget in the range of $325 million to $400 million, it's one of the most expensive films ever made, and Evans and Hemsworth both earned $50 million for the film. 15, not 50. So, after this film was shot and marketed, Avengers Infinity War premiered in Los Angeles on April 23, 2018, and was released in the United States on April 27th as part of Phase 3 of the MCU. The film received praise for Brolin's performance, visual effects, action sequences, and emotional weight, and the film was the fourth film of the first superhero film to gross over $2 billion worldwide at the box office, and broke numerous box office records, and was also the highest grossing film of 2018, and at the time the fourth highest grossing film, both worldwide in the United States and Canada. And it received a typical nomination for Best Visual Effects in the first Academy Awards. And we all know a fourth film would be released in April 2019. Now, as for my reaction, well, ever since the announcement, this was easily my most hyped Marvel film, along with Endgame ever since Age of Ultron. I just could not wait for this movie for years. Just when I heard not just the Avengers, but every single character in the MCU was going to come together for the big finale, I was just eager to see this one and hoped it would be better than Ultron. Then, the teaser came out at the end of November 2017, and I swear, I just could not stop watching it. I geeked out and posted all over my social medias that the teaser was finally out and it was already counting down the months for this movie to release. The more I heard of this film, the more and more excited I got. Then after more trailers and more endless hype, Infinity War finally released, and I went to see the Thursday night showing to avoid any spoilers. I didn't want this movie to be spoiled for me. I didn't want what the ending was going to be to be leaked for me. What did I think about this movie? Well, as soon as I saw this movie, this turned out to be my favorite movie of the MCU. Not just that, also one of my favorite movies of all time, and my favorite movie of 2018 without a doubt. I loved nearly everything about this movie, and this was easily the best MCU movie since The Winter Soldier. The 6-year wait for Thanos was worth it. I loved it that much that I went and saw this movie in theaters 3 times. Avengers Infinity War is a film that would seem to be utter crap if it were just a standalone movie, but a franchise stretching almost 20 films is unheard of, and making a great and satisfying climax of that franchise is impossible. But considering how many characters Marvel had to juggle together with this movie, there was no way this movie wouldn't suck. But it didn't. Marvel pulled it off. All the characters were balanced seemingly effortlessly. The action was amazing. The characters were great still. The story was compelling. Marvel made what should have been an overcrowded mess into one of the best superhero films ever made. Infinity War has ever since then been remembered for how it ends, with good reason. But the entire movie is incredible. The action, the humor, the cinematography, the heartbreak, etc. It was a culmination of 10 years of character development. The benefit of that hard work, the movie can start with incredible action and never let up. Most wouldn't agree because of the ending, but I still feel it's the best movie of the MCU for good reasons. Endgame is still good. I give it the same score as this, but Infinity War is still better. Infinity War felt like a shock impact on me. I think the best part of it was the fact that we had so many cool character meetups that as fans we never thought we'd see. Thor with the Guardians, wow, Star-Lord and Iron Man, Rocket and the Winter Soldier. The list could go on. They mastered the art of humor to help offset some deep hurt throughout the story. And the movie literally begins right where we left off with Thor Ragnarok. So technically speaking, in chronological order, this movie comes right after Ragnarok. Black Panther technically is set a week after Civil War, guys. Even though that was released before this movie, Black Panther actually is a week right after Civil War. So this is a few years after that movie. And unfortunately, it begins tragically. Loki dies in the very beginning of the movie while he was trying to unsuccessfully defeat Thanos. This clearly shows that this movie really means business. It's not afraid of, it has the balls to kill off characters we have grown to like all these years. Like Thor's hammer has broken, so he gets a new kind of hammer, which is like an axe called Stormbreaker. And then Iron Man's team faces Thanos in another very brutal attack, Captain America's team is able to get out of their imprisonment after events of Captain America Civil War. Well, technically speaking, Rogers freed them at the end of Civil War, so they're reuniting after going into hiding for 2 years to defeat this threat. And despite having a huge threat looming before them, and Captain America and Iron Man still feel guilty of what happened between them previously, and it's still not met up. And Thanos is undoubtedly the biggest threat to have ever been shown in any Marvel movie, MCU or otherwise. Unlike the comics where he's just simping behind death to show how many people he can kill, this time he has a motivation. And that motivation is so powerful he's ready to even sacrifice his own daughter Gamora for it. It's like, he even fought for many years to find Infinity Stones. There's no way that he will sacrifice his lifetime work over morals or ethics. And concepts like humanity, empathy, conscience don't hold him back anymore, as he was brought up by the Eternals, that piece of shit movie. In spite of being treated as one of them, he chose to part ways. Morals don't matter anymore, his ambition does. And every scene for this movie is shot very well. The story, the color palette, the choreography, the costumes, the score, everything is perfect. And it's perfectly reasonable to be apprehensive about Avengers Infinity War. This is a blockbuster film that's been 10 years in the making. Its plot hinted at and scattered throughout 18 other movies. It features 30 or so characters, each with their own complex backstories and motivations, and all of them are coming together in a bid to stop a giant purple alien dude from destroying the universe. It sounds ridiculous and feels impossible. But that's precisely what makes the final product such a monumental achievement. It's masterfully directed by Anthony Joe Russo. Infinity War is a bold, brainy filmmaking at its very best. The kind that will lift your spirits, blow your mind, shatter your soul. Occasionally in the same scene, it demonstrates on an epic scale what Marvel has known all along. And special effects and tightly choreographed action are there to serve a story. For all its blockbuster spectacle, the film works because it's anchored by the heart, humor, and humanity of its characters. Like, the basic plot of the movie is even simple. Thanos, the intergalactic purveyor of death and destruction, and the whole antagonist that's been teased for 6 years, has been on the hunt for the 6 Infinity Stones these past 3 years that will give him complete control of the elemental building blocks of the universe and able to snap away half of it with his fingers. He dispatches his minions to Earth to retrieve the Time Stone, curling the possession of Stephen Strange, carve the Mind Stone out of Vision, and it's a literal existential threat so terrifying that all the heroes we come to know, love, from the Avengers to the Guardians, have to put aside their differences and unite for the very first time against a common foe. And before this movie came out, I never thought the Guardians and the Avengers would ever team up because they're not from the same world. So this was a big shock when I heard they were going to team up in this movie. Like, how could they pull this off? There's no way they would be able to meet. They don't even live on Earth together. But they did it perfectly well. And I like Thor was the first one to meet them, and it made sense. And from the outside, it's immediately clear that neither the film's directors nor screenwriters are interested in playing it safe. No! Most other superhero films are bled at high stakes. The hero in the title might suffer untold trauma, but it's a super safe bet that he or she will make it to the end alive. But there's no such guarantee here. Within the first 10 minutes, we're like control the dark twisted depths which Thanos and his companions, the Black Order, will sink in order to achieve their goals. Death, as well as genuine loss and sacrifice, is instinct to the narrative drumbeat that drives Infinity War ever forward, and the film is all the better for it. And what's impressive about Infinity War is how it expertly juggles its constantly shifting tones and moods. When it's funny, it's deeply, truly funny, but without being overly obnoxious. The film finds maximum joy in flinging characters together with Mary Bannon, mixing and matching ones you'd never have expected to share scenes or trade banter. And Quill is often floored by Thor's godly muscles. Banner is charmed by the wit and intelligence of Shuri, and it'd be impossible not to be utterly delighted by Peter Dinklage's inspired cameo, where he plays the most giants, ironically, of all the heroes. Very ironic too. That's very cool. And speaking of Peter Dinklage, I actually loved Peter Dinklage's cameo. It was actually nice to see a Game of Thrones star actually star in an MCU movie and be of assistance to Thor. So it was nice to see an actor from Game of Thrones actually join this. And it's a biffly tongue-in-cheek sensibility shared by Marvel's best comic books, which understand that humor can make you care when it really counts. And there's a chilling echo of it in Thanos himself. A lesser film would have just turned Thanos into a one-dimensional villain, much the way he's all monster and maniac in the comic books. In Infinity War, however, Thanos' end goal is surprisingly relevant when it comes to thinking and talking about the staggering overpopulated world in which we live in today. There's, as it turns out, method to Thanos' madness. It makes a tragic twist and turns his relationships with his strange adopted daughters Gamora and Nebula all the more unsettling. And with this movie here, we actually get to see how their relationship with Thanos was. We even get a backstory how Gamora got adopted by Thanos in one scene, because how it happened was her village was getting invaded by Ebony Maw and Thanos and his army. That half got massacred. Thanos found Kid Gamora, and pretty much he gave her this knife to balance, which she manages to do. And he's like, perfectly balanced, as it all should be. It's a perfect backstory right there, and I liked we got to see that here. And there's another unique thing here, but also a very heartbreaking, sad one. You all remember in the Guardians films when we say that, when Nebula says that Thanos replaced all of her body parts in this movie? Well, and pretty much tortured her. Well, we actually get to see her torture in this movie, because between the events of Guardians 2 and this movie, she sneaks onto the ship to try to kill Thanos, but Thanos outsmarted her, captured her, and she was pretty much left frozen like that for probably a long time. And was probably left in that position for quite some years, because this is set 4 years after Guardians 2. So I wouldn't be surprised if she was left in that uncomfortable position for years, being stretched apart. Yeah. And this part really cemented Nebula as a sympathetic character, because after Thanos finds Gamora, and then brings her back to his ship and stuff to like discuss the whole Soul Stone. He shows her he captured Nebula, and this part is very heartbreaking. Like, when he mentions he borrowed to talk, he then stretches her apart, and unsurprisingly, Karen Gillan gives a very heartbreaking performance in the scene with her screams, and God, it's just disturbing to watch Nebula scream in pain like that. It's like, oh my God. That just made me feel bad for Nebula as a character, and it really made her it really cemented her as a sympathetic anti-hero. Like, oh God. I was so bad for her at that part. And you can even Saldana gave a great performance in that scene, because you could literally see the pain in Gamora's face as she's watching her sister be tortured, and doesn't want to have to go through that whole thing again. She just reconnected with her Guardians Volume 2, and she's pretty much forced to break the information to Thanos where the Soul Stone is, so that he'll stop torturing Nebula. And God, like, for the most part, Infinity War does justice too, and to the many heroes who have been assembled for the film, the Russo brothers displayed great skills at intervening in multiple perspectives in the character trajectories in Captain America Civil War, and they do so again here with twice as many characters. Even most minor supporting characters like Don Cheadle's James Rhodes and War Machine are given story beats that land. It helps that Marvel's always taken care to cast generally good actors in roles that might otherwise come off as silly in sight. And even so, there are a few standouts amongst this enormously talented cast, and emotionally speaking, this is Downey's film. He plays every note of Tony's reluctant courage and bone-deep trauma as he embarks on what he's convinced on a suicide mission. He's ably matched by Benedict Cumberbatch, who finds vulnerability even in his character's most cunning and calculative move. Hemsworth, meanwhile, is given free rein to port the big-hearted comedic swagger of Thor Ragnarok into this film, but layering it into a deeply felt jagged grief for the losses he has suffered at the hands of Thanos in the universe. So, what I liked here, this was probably my favorite portrayal of Thor in this movie. Like, I liked they made Thor such a badass in this film, especially with his entrance and his acts. Like, why couldn't we see this? It's a shame we didn't get to see this Thor a little more often. This was the best portrayal of the character in the MCU, easily. He was fine in Ragnarok, but I like we went back to the serious Thor with this movie. Here. And the story is exhilarating too, as it moves at a brisk pace, which really makes you feel the immersed stakes and how urgent the situation is. Every single character is handled extremely well, are all in character. The film makes sure to pay attention to what spot they're in their character journey since the last film each respective character was in, and continues their development, and maintains continuity, and brings every character together in a way that's organic and serves the story perfectly. And Tony Stark finally gets to fight the thing he has been tormented by and preparing for 6 years to fight. Steve Rogers and the other Avengers are still fugitives of the law, and thus are more rugged. Bruce Banner's even still dealing with this conflict with Hulk from Ragnarok, and Thor's dealing with the grief of losing everything, manifesting personal vengeance towards Thanos, and much more. But perhaps the best thing about this film is the characterization of Thanos. One of the best films easily in cinema since the Joker from The Dark Knight and Darth Vader from Star Wars. He is a ruthless, insane, and narcissistic monster, but he has honorable traits, respects his enemies, and has a very flawed perspective on how to save the universe, but believes it wholeheartedly. And even if fatherly love towards Gamora here, he's terrifying but also kind of humanized, and it works perfectly well. And the computer-generated effects especially those that brought Thanos to life, are perfect, as is the soundtrack. While MCU scores are typically regarded as forgettable, Alan Silverstride's scores for Infinity War is anything but, and the performances are impeccable as well. There's not a single unsatisfying or uneven performance, and Josh Brolin Thanos, Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, Chris Hemsworth as Thor, Chris Evans as Steve Rogers, Pratt as Star Peter Quill, Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda, and Zoe Saldana as Gamora in particular stick out to me the most in this one, and they knock it out of the park. And the middle was just as good too, with some lighthearted moments like the Guardians' entrance, which is also my favorite after Thor's to Wakanda, and some funny scenes like with the Guardians like, "Are you mocking me?" And the action scenes in New York with some banter involved with Spider-Man, and the part where, and also, let's not forget, get lost, Squidward! And the part where Thor forges Stormbreaker is one of the most epic scenes in the whole MCU, and we actually got to see Teenage Groot in this one actually provide some actual use, other than just play his game and like, say, "I am Groot," aka swear at Quill when he tells him to put his game away, in Groot language anyways. But Thor's entrance to Wakanda though, it's indescribable. I got chills in the theater, and chills just thinking about it now. Remember the other Avengers hadn't seen in 2+ years, and he looked awesome, especially with his new act Stormbreaker, and it's a phenomenal entrance right there, and he yells that great catchphrase, "Bring me Thanos!" Oh yeah. And now, here's another part. Once again, y'all remember I mentioned my fictional self, Harold Hartigan, in Avengers, Winter Soldier, Age of Ultron, Civil War reviews? Well, here's just where he gets mentioned again, his story arc. Following y'all remember when I mentioned that Grayson would have died in the end of Civil War during Siberia moments while trying to apprehend Zemo? Well, Harold's of course been on the run and hiding in Edinburgh, Scotland for 2 years, ever since he violated the Sokovia Accords, and some people on the news even outright slam him and blame him for the death of his brother and father. Even thinking, after violating the Accords, they found out about Grayson's death, okay? They eventually did. They're gonna have to. Some way. They can't just be, like, with this story, they can't keep the citizens in the dark about Grayson's death. They're gonna need to know that. But Harold would soon be forced to come out of grief and hiding to rejoin the remainder of his faction. And of course, we all know their new allies from space. When pretty much Thanos, the one in charge of the whole battle in New York from the first film, was hell-bent on finding all 6 of the Infinity Stones. So yeah. Harold would pretty much be where Wanda and Vision are in Edinburgh, because remember I mentioned Grayson wanted to go to Edinburgh if he had a dream destination when I did my Age of Ultron review, and Harold decided to bury him there after he died? Yeah guys, it would suck killing off Grayson, but Harold's story is going to need to have some emotional consequences to it. But guys, don't worry, just be patient, he'll get a happy ending. Just wait. But, not going to be here. The hell he went through Civil War just gets worse with this movie. But how would that whole thing happen? Well, most of the stuff would have been from the Civil War epilogue comic that came before this movie. Well, that comic begins right after the Hydra Siberia facility, and Cap and Bucky Barnes run to T'Challa, who had apologized to Barnes for believing him to be his father's killer after catching Zemo, and then would find a way to erase this mental programming. This is from the Civil War prelude comic. And then route to Wakanda, Rogers and Harold would free their teammates from the raft, obviously, and apologize for being a bit late. And then the team, of course, goes their separate ways, where Barton retires to go on house arrest with his family. Scott Lang does the same with his daughter. Wanda then pretty much would be living with Harold in Edinburgh, knowing because he can't be down there all alone. And then the two would obviously get met up by Vision, and Rogers or Barnes, on the other hand, stay in Wakanda, and the latter agreeing to go to cryostasis, like in the post-credit scene of Civil War, and remain under supervision of Shuri. So yeah. The prelude comic would explain why Harold was in Edinburgh. It actually kind of does explain more and actually shows how they got freed and what happened after that. So, check that comic out. And Harold's story would pretty much play like Cap's fraction story in this one. So yeah, he would get the less scenes here, and he wouldn't do much during it or remain inside the Wakanda compound where Vision's getting the star move to prevent Thanos from finding it. But unlike Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi or Jake Skywalker, there would be a reason why he doesn't do much, because I'll mention that part later. But of course we all know Glaive gets there, and so Harold would be forced to leave the compound so he can aid his comrades. And guys, the reason why he wouldn't be much use, because unlike Jake Skywalker in The Last Jedi, who did nothing for no reason, here he's still grieving over his brother, and and he's kind of having to get pulled into this fight at pretty much the worst possible time. He wasn't ready yet. But of course, yeah, we all know how the movie goes. Thanos ends up getting the Mind Stone anyway, and this is where Harold would finally try to fight Thanos here. After Thanos gets the stone, Harold decides to try to fight him, and while he does get a few punches down the Titan, Thanos would use the gauntlet to pretty much freeze Harold, recognizes him to be Franklin's son before it was revealed that, like, Franklin had to counter him on his once during one of his space missions, and pretty much foiled one of his half the universe massacres. And since then, he would have found out that Franklin had children during their encounterment, and his plan for revenge on Franklin for foiling that plan would have been to kidnap his two children, recruit them to his Black Order, hence why I mentioned that Chitauri attack when I reviewed the first Avengers film on that Hargit farmhouse in the first chapter of the story, and then kill Franklin, and then pretty much he would then unfreeze Harold, and beat his crazy ass to a fucking pulp. Yeah, guys, like, some heroes gotta get hurt here. Luke Skywalker got injured losing a hand in Empire Strikes Back, Frodo lost a finger in Return of the King, Neo lost his eyesight in Revolutions, and Superman got the crap fucking kicked out of him in Superman Returns, and Johnny Five got smashed to pieces in Short Circuit 2. So yeah, guys, all the greats do get near fatal injuries. And after Harold would be all weakened and hurt from the attacks, and now desperately trying to escape out of fear when he sees how strong he is, and then of course the Titan would be walking over to Harold, picking up this sharp tree branch, sharpening it even more as he just walks over, picks up Harold, then would stab it right into his left arm, slice it in half. Yeah, guys, that was the injury I was foreshadowing for Harold in my Winter Soldier review. That's the injury that I mentioned. Then Harold's critically injured and would be unconscious in pain and shock, so he wouldn't be awake for the rest of the ending, and he wouldn't have known about the snap till Endgame. But now back to review. And even though the title says Avengers, it's more of a Thanos movie, and probably the best character in this film, and has the most screen time, and Josh Brolin did an amazing job in portraying Thanos. The character development is great, except for the children of Thanos, which disappointed me a little bit because they didn't have that much development and screen time, but that was expected since there were a lot of characters in this film. Each character shines in their own way, and the comedy is paced well. So let's not take away the depth, the pain, the suffering, the severity of this story arc. SFX is some of the best I've ever seen in my opinion, and there are some slight flaws here and there, but not enough to take your mind of the story on screen. Thanos just looks amazing for the true con fans like Mystery Kevin Feige, the Russellverse, and Team of Marvel Studios of excellent in bringing a Dark Titan for page to screen. Josh Brolin is totally worth playing this nemesis. Brolin adds heart, pain, power, and a sadness to this character. As always, the Marvel team hits a home run with the casting. Every little detail is put into Thanos. For a purple giant who looks realistic, from an eyebrow movement or a cheek twitch to turn on full capable gladiator and battle stance, he looks like a living, breathing being. However, even though it's my favorite MCU film, it does have some nitpicks. One part I had with earlier was when Star-Lord learned about Thanos having killed Gamora. Star-Lord makes the stupidest mistake, and he punches Thanos till he wakes up and is stopped, and the plan is ruined. Yeah, that part was known for ruining his reputation for a lot of people. Some people are even still pissed at Star-Lord even. And yeah, I get we still had another movie coming out the next year, but that's how you have them fail? Make a sympathetic character ruin everything? Seriously? And even during the ending, like, when everyone's getting dusted away, Star-Lord's like, all like, as he sees his team get stabbed away, with that fear of look in his face, he's pretty much like, oh shit, yeah, this was a fucking stupid idea. No shit, you think? Moron! Another problem would also be Cap doesn't really get much screen time in this one, but it does make sense. And I do feel like Thanos' children don't even get much development in this movie either. And with the beginning, they did kind of go a little bit too Alien 3 on the ending of Ragnarok, though not nearly as obvious. Basically because with Heimdall and Loki getting killed, but at least Loki died finally a good guy here. But I wanted to see him redeem himself to the Avengers and get to team up with them. That could have been really interesting. With Heimdall, it does make sense, because Idris Elba didn't even like playing the character. So I don't really blame him. Blame that one. And I hate Hulk gets no screen time in this movie. Like, if it were just this film, it would make sense, but they could have waited till Endgame to bring this Hulk form back. They did, but not the best way possible. That's another review, though. But now let's talk about the ending. The ending is fucking perfect. After Thor attacks Thanos, is like, I told you to die for that. Stabs Stormbreaker to Thanos' chest, and then Thanos does regain some consciousness, and is like, You should have gone for the head. And guess what, guys? After he's completed the gauntlet, first thing he does, raises his fingers like to Thor, and then snaps his fingers, and Thor's like, no! And you see a white screen, and then Thanos is like in the soul realm. He sees young Gamora, and she's like, did you do it? And Thanos says yes, and then she asks what it costs, and he says, everything. And then cuts back to the burnt gauntlet, and Thor's like, what did you do? What did you do? And Thanos just grins, smirks at him, and is like, haha, sucker. Kind of like that, and then pretty much uses the gauntlet to escape, pretty much curing his wound as he's being transported to his farmhouse. Then Cap regains consciousness after being knocked out, and now wondering where he is. Unfortunately, Bucky's the first one to bite the dust. He sees Bucky disintegrates, and then Thor and Cap have that look of fear on their faces. You even see the Wakanda army snapped away from existence, and you see a look of fear on M'Baku's face when he realizes Thanos did it. Then when T'Challa's trying to help out Okoye, he snaps away, sadly. And then Okoye's like, oh god, and then Rocket has to witness Groot dying again. And look at this, guys. Gunn confirmed that Groot's last words as he was being dusted away were, Dad. And then he dusts away. Wanda's is pretty peaceful. She decides to let herself die. Just as Sam regains consciousness, he dusts away. And it's very sad when Rhodey's looking for him. Then we cut back to Tony's fraction. The Guardians snap away. And then Tony's like, steady, Quill. At first, I always kept thinking he said stay, Quill, which honestly is even sadder here. So, because it kind of sounded like he was saying stay, Quill. So, but he said steady. But he makes the scene even more sadder and heartbreaking. And then Stephen Strange says, because this was the one vision he saw, he's like, Tony, there is no other way. And this next scene really broke me. This next scene broke me in the theater. And then you hear Peter Parker, even though this is not my favorite portrayal of Spider-Man, this was still heartbreaking to watch. Parker then says, Stark, I don't feel so good. And then I was like, no. I was very horrified when he said that because I realized he was also going to bite the dust. I was really begging not to kill off Spider-Man. This was even though this is not my favorite portrayal of Spider-Man, this was still heartbreaking to watch because Spider-Man was actually the first Marvel hero I got introduced to. It was the hero that made me a Marvel fan. So this was just heartbreaking to see this happen to him. And Tom Holland's acting here is terrific. He's just sobbing. He's sobbing, I don't want to go. As he's hugging Tony Stark. And that's, I remember crying so hard in the theater when Parker dusted away. I was crying so hard in the theater when that happens. And then Parker then says sorry, he dusts away. And Robert Downey Jr. gives a very heartbreaking performance here when he's just going in despair. And then Nebula can just say, he did it. And he's just holding on to that one bit of dust he has still in his hand, the last traits he has of Parker. And the Cap's fraction is looking at Vision's lifeless body. And then it cuts to Thanos on his farmhouse, and he's just sitting smiling. And it cuts to black, the credits roll. Everyone was in the theater when the credits rolled, just out of their mind, not talking. Nobody even left when the credits rolled. Even I didn't. This was probably the first Marvel movie where I stayed for the whole credits. And then we get a post-credits scene where we finally see Nick and Maria Hill. That was another bad quality. Where were Nick and Maria during this movie? And then they're driving, the snap's happening in their area, a car crash then happens, they get out, they see nobody's there, and then you see a copter smashing into buildings, and everyone's now terrified. And then Nick Fury's all co-red, then he sees Hill disappearing, and then he immediately is like, oh shit, and he quickly runs to go get this pager to activate it in his car. But then he starts to dust away, and there was a little kind of a funny moment where he's about to say motherfucker, but he doesn't get to say it because he dusts away. But at least there was one little funny moment, though, from Samuel L. Jackson, who pretty much had the best reaction. And then the pager falls, and this was exciting at the time until we knew what kind of bad movie we were about to get. It pretty much is a pager for Captain Marvel. This was exciting until I saw her solo movie and her trailers. And all the Brie Larson controversy. That's another review, though. Because despite the nitpicks I mentioned, Infinity War is without a doubt a masterpiece and is an example of a cliffhanger done the right way. So in the end, Infinity War is a masterpiece that I highly recommend watching and buying if you are a big MCU fan, because this might have to be tied with Spider-Man 2 as my favorite Marvel movie, my favorite movie of the MCU, and Infinity Saga as a whole, and easily one of my favorite movies of all time, period. Anyways, that's it for my review of Avengers Infinity War. If you're wondering how I'm going to rank Avengers Infinity War, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you are a die-hard fan of the Infinity Saga and finally want to see the best MCU villain appear after 6 years of build-up with movies, then I would highly recommend watching this movie and buying this movie for your collection for sure. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Avengers Infinity War, I'm going to give Avengers Infinity War a 10 out of 10. There we go. That pretty much wraps up my review for Avengers Infinity War. Yeah, and now only 3 more MCU movies to go. But it felt exciting to finally get to talk about the best MCU movie. And until then, guys, that'll be it for this review. Thank y'all for watching. If you like this, want to see more, and don't forget to like, subscribe.
What the fuck? Pass me. What the heck are you doing in my room?
How did you get in here? Shouldn't you be imprisoned in Oceania? Oh crap. I think he figured me out. Well, fuck it. You didn't think I'd be trapped for long, future me, did you? I escaped with this weapon. Hey, that's my gauntlet. Give it back. Oh, you want your gauntlet? Come and get it, motherfucker. 3, 2, 1, you're it! Okay, here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna challenge you to the endgame review, and it's gonna be a duel-on review, and if you even think of trying to cowardly back out, then I will just not be afraid to use this gauntlet. Let's see what happens when I try that. You don't want me to do that? Then get on with the duel review after the next 3. No questions asked. Okay, I'll do it. I'll challenge you to a duel. Just please don't snap away anybody else. Please. Okay. Good choice. April 26, 11 a.m. Do not be late, or I swear I will use this thing. Deal?
Deal.
Good. That's what I like to hear. Now I'll see you on April 26th. Gauntlet, take him to the Soul Room. No! Anyway, guys, that was easy. But now, anyways, that'll be it for this video. Thank y'all for watching. If you like this and want to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.